So, if you haven't tried to read Stephen King but don't know where to start, this might be the video for you. Stay tuned. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Zach with Zach's Books, and today I've got for you my Stephen King starting guide for reading Stephen King books.
Okay, question 1. Which was your first Stephen King book?
My first Stephen King book was actually a Richard Bachman book, and it was a hard read of The Long Walk. This book was really good. It doesn't really have that horror aspect to it. It's a gripping tale. It keeps you on the edge of your seat for what's going to happen. Without spoilers, it's 100 kids go for a walk, and if they don't complete the walk after getting 3 strikes, meaning that they slow down too much or they just stop, something happens. Got to read the book to find out. But I really like this. This was a 5 out of 5.
Okay. Question number 2. Which book would you recommend for the people who like a lighter level of scare?
I personally have not read this book yet, but I've heard a lot of good things. And that's 11/22/63. This is about a guy who goes back in time to the John F. Kennedy assassination and stops it. Obviously, with it being thicker, a lot more happens than just that. So I'm interested to get into it, and to my understanding, it's got really no horror to it. It's just a gripping tale.
It's more historical fiction, right?
Yeah, it's a more historical fiction type book. So I'm excited to get to it.
Question number 3. Which book do you recommend for the people who love true/hard crime?
This is another one I have not read yet, but The Outsider by Stephen King. I read If It Bleeds, which is kind of like a little sequel to this, and that was like a really good like type of crime book. And The Outsider is pretty much just the prequel to that, just expanded to obviously a novel-sized book. I want to read this. It's a more recent read too, and I would say The Outsider for a crime book isn't really another one that
it was also made into a Hulu show, I think, right?
I think it was Netflix.
One or the other.
So it's a TV show.
Okay, question number 4. Which book do you recommend for the full-on horror lovers?
Full-on horror lovers. I would say this was my first actual just Stephen King read. I would say Pet Sematary. This book was creepy, and this got a 5 out of 5. It's in my top 5 favorites of all time. This book is, he put this in a chest and hid it away for months to years, saying that this story was too scary to publish. And eventually he did publish it, and we got this amazing book. I would say Pet Sematary if you are really into that eerie, creepy horror aspect.
Okay, question number 5. Which book would you recommend for a short and fast favorite?
Short and fast favorite. There's always the short stories, but if you're just going purely off of novels, I would say his first, Carrie. This got a 4 out of 5 for me. It was just a good read. I was able to read it in just a day. It's not that thick. Thanks to Tabitha, his wife, we actually got this, and he became the person he is today. If it wasn't her taking it out of the trash and telling him to write it, we wouldn't have this, and we wouldn't have Stephen King probably. But yeah, it's a pretty thin book. Like I said, I was able to do it in a day.
So shout out Tabitha.
Yeah, shout out to Tabitha King. Good job.
Okay, question number 6. Which book for a supernatural lover?
So for a supernatural lover, I was torn between 2, but solely for the fact that I have not read the Tommyknockers yet, and that I know The Green Mile. This one has got some pretty cool supernatural elements to it. Mainly John Coffey. He's a death row inmate on what they call the Green Mile, and he's just got supernatural abilities, and he's wrongfully accused of murdering 2 little girls, and so the story is pretty much him on death row with a few other inmates, and it's a good story. It's also kind of sad because you don't, with it being death row, you kind of know what's going to happen to him, but they also explain in the story his innocence, so it just kind of makes it more like, he's in the wrong spot. He shouldn't be there, and he shouldn't get what's coming to him. But he might not.
Okay, question number 7. Which novel for the fans of short story collections?
So, I was torn between a few of them, but I ended up having to pick 2 because I just couldn't neglect these 2 options. The first one is Skeleton Crew, solely because it's got the monkey, the raft, and there's another one in here that was really good. The monkey, the mist, the monkey, and the raft alone make this a top short story novella collection, in my opinion. The other one is Different Seasons. For Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, The Body, Apt Pupil, those are all books that I really, really need to read. The adaptations to film are really good, and I just want to read them. There's also the breathing method in this. Not a lot of people talk about that. I don't know why I haven't read it yet either, but I want to get to it. So I would say for a short story, Skeleton Crew and Different Seasons.
Okay, question number 8. Which book had the best film/TV adaptation while also being a very good read?
So, for me, not having have read Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, I couldn't put this in this spot. The movie is phenomenal, but I have not read the book, so I can't put that on this list. So I went with one that is going to cause some controversy with some Stephen King fans. I went with The Shining. A lot of people hate Stanley Kubrick's movie. A lot of people love Stanley Kubrick's movie. I'm one of the ones who watched the movie before I read the book. I watched it when I was a little kid, and I loved it. Jack Torrance's character is probably in my top characters that Stephen King has written about, and this is in my top 3 novels that he has written. I love the story. I love the creepy atmosphere of the hotel, Jack's descent into madness. The TV miniseries that was made in the 90s, it had its moments. It was super long. It was like 6 hours or something like that. But I watched it. It was okay. I just like Jack Nicholson's performance way more than Steven Weber's. But he also had to fill the shoes of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, and that's a pretty big role to fill.
That is probably your favorite character of all time in film.
Yeah. I've got his jacket. I've got Funko Pops of him. I own a numerous amount of copies of this book. The Shining book was really good, 5 out of 5. The movie, 5 out of 5. It does take a little while to get going, I will admit, being the fan I am of the movie, seeing it hundreds of times. The first, I would say 45 minutes to an hour, kind of drags a little bit, but then in the middle, it picks up big time.
I can agree with that.
Yes, I made you sit and watch it, and it was about that. So, I would say the best movie, TV adaptation that I have read the book to and watched the movie is The Shining. I do recommend watching it and reading it, going into it knowing that there is a difference between the two, because there is.
Okay. Question number 9. Which book would you recommend for people who like sequels or series?
So, The Shining does have a sequel called Dr. Sleep, and that was another good book. I think I also gave it 4 out of 5. Check out my Goodreads down below. But I decided to go with The Gunslinger, the Dark Tower series. There are 8 books in this series. This is book number 1, The Gunslinger. Book number 2 is The Drawing of the Three. Book 3 is The Wastelands. Book 4 is Wizard and Glass. 5 is Wolves of the Kala. 6 is Song of Susanna. 7 is just called The Dark Tower. And in 2012, he wrote another one called Wind Through the Keyhole that goes in between Wizard and Glass and Wolves of the Kala. There is also like a prequel called The Sisters of Allura, which goes before this, which tells the story of Roland as a younger gunslinger. I don't own a copy of that, but it is a short story, and I believe Hearts in Atlantis, I think it's in that. Don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. But I'm on book 7 right now, reading them in chronological order. Obviously with Wind Through the Keyhole in between Wizard and Glass and Wolves of the Kala. And I love this series. It's, with it being the size of it is, being his magnum opus, you've got a lot to read. Book 1 kind of introduces you to Roland and his world and everything, Dark Tower gunslinger wise. Drawing of 3 introduces you to his quartet, which is like his group of other gunslingers, and he trains them. And then book 3 gets you to the beginning of the journey. They go out and the journey begins to seek out this Dark Tower, and then book 4 happens. And that is a 700-page backstory to Roland. It kind of threw me off. I gave it 4 stars. It was a good book, but it just kind of took away from everything that was going on. What I mean by that is, like I said, in book 3, you start the journey. Then book 4, it begins where you left off in book 3. And then just shoots you back, like, way back when Roland was younger. And I personally felt like it wasn't necessary for where it fell in the timeline. It felt like that could have been something that was done at the very end, like Wind Through the Keyhole. I felt like that could have been saved for later. But like I said, it was still a good book. I just felt like it was just out of place. Like, just keep going with the story. Like, Wolves of the Kala should have been book 4, in my opinion. Wolves of the Kala is another beefier book. It's a good book. I like it. And then you get Song of Susanna, another really good one. It's a little bit of a shorter read, not as short as Gunslinger is. It's about the size of Drawing of the 3. And then Dark Tower book 7, which is the one I'm reading now, is another beefy book, and I've gotten pretty far in it. That's going to be on my reading vlog we're filming, and that's going to be coming up soon. But otherwise, this whole series has been tremendous. It has been a great journey. I'm sad to have it come to a conclusion for the first time. Obviously, I'm going to do rereads of the series, but otherwise, it's definitely worth the read.
Question number 10. Which book is your all-time favorite?
This is a tough question for a lot of Stephen King fans. And I'm torn between The Shining and the one that I ended up picking. As much as I love The Shining, this book that I picked is just got a big story to it, and it's really, really good. And I picked it. This book is really thick. It's a little bit smaller than the uncut version of The Stand, but this book it's a great story. It's long. If you can get through this, you can get through pretty much any of his other books. It's really good. It's like hard to really describe it with how good it actually is. It's about Pennywise, and it's pretty much an entity that can take the form of like your deepest fears. It follows a group of 7 friends called the Losers Club, and Pennywise is probably another one of my top favorite characters in Stephen King books. His main thing he really turns into is a clown. That's more or less in movie adaptation, but in the book he does turn into the clown a fair amount of times. He also turns into the mummy, a werewolf, a horde of insects. I think it's locusts, but I don't know off the top of my head. There is only the one part of this book that makes it skeptical on being another person's favorite, and that's that scene towards the end. And if you've read it, you know what scene I'm talking about. It really throws people off for a loop. It kind of feels like, why was this necessary? The other counter argument is it was necessary to make them closer together to help defeat Pennywise and it. I'm one of the ones who is torn between both of those opinions. I felt like it was a little weird and out of place, and I don't know why that needed to happen. And at the same time, I can see why it was necessary. It bound their losers club together to help defeat it. And I mean, it was a good read. The audiobook is pretty much a day's long. It's like 48 hours if you do 2 times the speed, which is what I normally do. But it's definitely worth the read if you've got the time. So my all-time favorite, narrowly beating out The Shining and Pet Sematary, is my highly recommended book, It.
Okay, last question, number 11. Which book is your hidden gem book that not many others have enjoyed?
My hidden gem book is a recent read I just had. I wouldn't say it's mainly because people just didn't like it. I would say it's just there are other books that take priority over this book. It also could be because people don't like it. It's just not talked about as much as I think it should be. And that is Christine. This book got 5 out of 5 for me. It's in my top 5. It knocked Misery out of my top 5. And actually pushed The Long Walk to number 5. This is my 4th favorite Stephen King novel of all time. That list is also going to be coming out soon. So be ready for that if you want more suggestions on just my top 5 in general. This book is about a kid named Arnie Cunningham who buys a Plymouth Fury from a guy, a 58 Plymouth Fury, and the guy named his car Christine. And what ends up happening is the guy's wife and daughter both died in the car. And then after the guy sells him the car, he dies. And so it's a weird story. It's got some supernatural aspect to it, but it's a really good book. So these are the books that I recommend in my personal Stephen King starter pack. If you have any favorites, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Hey, Joe.